to this week's episode of the Mega C-Suite Stories. I'm your host, Shamin Tan, and today we get to meet with Doug Witschi, who is the Assistant Director of the Cybercrime Threat Response at Interpol. In this episode, we talk about the current issues of cybercrime, observations and stories of recent cases that Interpol was involved in, including the role that we can play as an ecosystem. Doug, how about a short introduction to yourself?
Ready? Doug Witschi is my name. I'm an Assistant Director for the Cybercrime Directorate at Interpol in Singapore. I'm a seconded police officer from the Australian Federal Police. I've been in law enforcement for 35 years. My role at Interpol primarily is across three capabilities currently within the Cybercrime Directorate. I run the Cyber Threat Response capability that looks after our intelligence and our threat response activities that we are called upon to look at, and we've been quite active through the COVID-19, particularly around ransomwares against hospitals globally. My second responsibility is cybercrime global operations. We run cybercrime operations throughout the world. We work with member countries as well as our private public partners to respond to threats and issues we're identified, work up operational activities with member countries that are aimed to lead to some sort of disruption or prosecution of the targets and the actors behind those threats. And the third capability that I'm responsible for is I lead the Interpol's Global Financial Crime Task Force, which is a whole of organisation activity that looks at primarily the scams and the frauds around COVID-19, the issues around counterfeit or supply chain challenges around the delivery of the COVID vaccine and business email compromise. So they're the three activities that I currently lead for on behalf of Interpol. My passions, look, I'm here to make a difference. I'm here to try to sort of solve some of the challenges and issues that I guess cybercrime presents to the global community. I'm here to try to make people more aware of the threats and vulnerabilities that exist and how they might be able to better position themselves moving forward for the future. Outside of that, I'm a passionate sailor, a passionate scuba diver, and I do love spending time with my family.
Nice. All right, so let's kick it off. In a conversation we had earlier, you were talking about how cybercrime presents a global threat to the global industry, and a global problem needs a global solution. Can you talk through more about the current issues and how we can be addressing this as an industry?
Oh, look, I think there's many issues around cybercrime that are challenging us at the moment. Obviously, the most significant, I think, would be the issues around ransomware and the deployment of ransomware into systems. A lot of industry have been targeted and attacked. Various sectors of industry have been the focus. And most notably, over the last couple of weeks, the attacks against critical infrastructure in the US, as well as other industries like the health services in Europe. So for us, as a responding agency, we've seen a lot of issues around ransomware. I think the challenge with industry, though, is they tend to hold the problem close to them. Well, whether it's a fear around reputation, the fact that they've been hacked, issues or liabilities that might be associated with the data breach or privacy, they're not necessarily sharing the problem outside of a very close network of close and trusted associates or partners, whether it's a private industry security firm or the like. And I think that's one of the challenges we see as a significant threat and challenge for us globally as we try to tackle these types of issues. I'll give you an example. I was out for dinner one night in Singapore, and I was having dinner with a young lady as part of a group, and she mentioned that her company had been attacked by a ransomware. So I got the name of her company, went back to the office, made some inquiries, and we identified the ransomware that had attacked that company. They'd been suffering from that attack for around about 10 days. So we reached out to the country where that company was housed and offered our assistance because we had a decryptor for that type of ransomware. We could have solved that issue in the matter of minutes as opposed to a delay of many, many weeks. So it presents some really significant challenges to us in relation to, sharing information. Obviously, sharing that problem, which sometimes is industry is reluctant to do, And, we've come up with a catchphrase, dare to share, in relation to this type of information, intelligence and identifying information that may help in preventing, disrupting or apprehending the targets behind these threats.
That's a really good phrase, Doug. When we talk about an ecosystem, countries really need to be partnering with other countries, and alliance needs to be formed across the different sectors as we work towards a common solution. Can you elaborate a bit about the ecosystem view that you have?
Sure. I think for us, we're, over 60% of the global population is connected virtually through the internet. I think that in itself is astounding, and that's growing. And we saw a significant spike of people, first-time users to the internet during the COVID crisis last year, and it obviously continues as people still continue to have legacy issues around stay-at-home quarantines, being able to connect to business, being able to connect to family and friends. And so the internet provides a convenient tool for doing a lot of services and capabilities that individuals that traditionally used to do shopfront type of contact, or using of the telephone. So I think the internet provides some great services and great opportunities for everyone globally. The challenge is it also provides great opportunities and for exploitation and criminal activity as well. And the challenge for us as part of an international community, a cyber attack on one is a cyber attack on all in the virtual environment, because the vulnerabilities that have been identified will be exploited against other potential targets. And we've seen, some of the big tech, very rapidly trying to patch software that where breaches have been identified. So, these are challenges for us globally. And for us as a global ecosystem, we need to actually start to come together and work a lot more collegially and collaboratively. Yes, politics plays a part in some of the discussions that we have across geopolitical environments.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we're chasing criminals. We're chasing people that are trying to exploit other people and take advantage of other people. And dare I say it, criminals come in all shapes and sizes too. We get the organised crime, transnational organised crime. We also get people that commit crime out of necessity too. So as a global community, we also have responsibilities to try to mitigate that risk in relation to a potential threat actor.
Yes, very well said, Doug. And what a way to put things into perspective. What is the greatest challenge that you see our industry face when it comes to collaboration in consideration of the geopolitical lens?
Yeah, look, for us, I guess we're in a unique position. We represent 194 member countries. We have a very fantastic collection of private-public partners across the globe that support us in our mission. We try to make sure we focus on what needs to get done to make these things happen. And I think too, we're unique in that we are a neutral organisation. The politics that surround us and surround nations generally don't apply specifically to us. If we identify state actors, we exonerate or we remove ourselves from those inquiries, and we leave that to the national states to pursue. It's not our purvey or interest. What we are chasing are the criminal elements and the criminal aspects. And for us, the geopolitics plays an important view. An example, we had a case last year where we were getting a series of attacks against financial institutions around the world. As a result of some discussions that we had with one of our partners, we asked them to share their data with another one of our partners, a private sector partner, and that was from the not-for-profit sector, who had done quite a bit of work in activities around the internet. Through that cross-referencing of data, we obtained some significant identifiers that led us to a target, a threat actor that was behind the threats that we're currently seeing. So for us, that was a fantastic outcome. Unfortunately for us, the partner that received the sharing information wasn't aware of our involvement. So they got the good news and shared it fairly broadly with Western countries primarily. And through that sharing with Western countries, it isolated Eastern countries. And ideally for us, we got notified as part of that hurrah type, success in relation to the potential identification of the threat actor. But for us to actually take action, we needed the assistance and support of the Eastern countries. And they felt isolated by the fact that it had been shared with Western countries, and one of the Western countries had taken a lead on that, and they didn't want to partner or have activities around that engagement with that Western country. So for us, we can walk a line. We can work out the best way to be able to tackle that threat, and we can actually put mechanisms and actions through the relationships and partnerships through the various member countries that are party to Interpol's mission.
Yes, that's a really good, strong point, Doug. And if I were to bring it back to what you mentioned earlier about the issue of underreporting, which contributes to the lack of collaboration, are you able to share specific examples of countries where you've identified victims and you've brought it up to their attention, but to them this is entirely fresh news?
Look, for us, there's many reasons why cybercrime's underreported. I've been a policeman for many, many years, and I've seen the emergence of the internet, or the commercialisation of the internet, during the late 80s and early 90s. And I watched from afar as people started to become victims of crime, and they reported it to police at the various services and agencies that worked in at that time, and the police didn't know what to do. And I think that's continued in some shape or form. The police get focused on the technical aspects rather than considering the people elements around the reasons for crime. And once issues and activities extend beyond the jurisdiction, particularly with young police, they're unaware, they're unfamiliar, they don't know what potential inquiries or avenues of inquiries exist, or how activities might be reported through to make sure that things get done. I think over that time, the public have felt in some shape or form, and this is my opinion, has felt in some shape or form that the value of reporting is not actually there, so why report? And I think I've seen over the last half dozen years a change in that. I think we're starting to see more and more reporting, but there's still these challenges from a law enforcement perspective of how to actually action activities quickly in an international environment when you're providing potentially a domestic policing service. So that's one aspect in relation to those reporting issues. I discussed previously around industry and their rationale or issues around reporting. There's a big discussion at the moment, and I read some interesting articles over the weekend around ransomware and the payment of the ransom. It's interesting, we make an official statement not to pay a ransom around the ransomware issue, but when your business livelihoods and the livelihoods of your personnel and people that work within your organisation are at stake, it presents some interesting challenges and issues for the organisation to take certain actions. Now, I'm not saying that paying the ransom is the right thing to do. Don't get me wrong. I don't think criminals should be rewarded for their activities and behaviours. But when the livelihoods of others are at stake, that's a decision organisations need to make. And as such, if they choose to walk a path of that, then it's less likely that they're going to report that. And also, they're probably not commercially agreeable to sharing that information more broadly. We've seen over the last couple of weeks, a couple of attacks on big corporates, and it gets national and international headlines around the world that they've been the focus of a ransomware attack. The terrible actions and suffering that's going on in Ireland's health service around the attack on them has made global coverage. We've had the gas pipelines in the United States. We've had JBS meat services in Australia and the US.
Yes.
That have been attacked by these various ransomwares recently. For us, it hits home because one of the issues we try to do as we try to target and look at the threats and try to get a response around the threats is to obviously actively engage with national states to actually get them to buy into activities, operations and disruption focuses. And sometimes we can't get the priority because they haven't got an identified number of threats, risks or issues that they've identified within this jurisdiction. And one of those is the reporting element. You know, we identified a ransomware, Australian ransomware that was exploited across one country. Through one of our private-public partners, we were able to collate over 11,000 victims in that country. And when we advised that country that they've got an issue with that ransomware strain, they told us that they'd only had 2 reports. And they were surprised when we provided them that list of over 11,000 victims in their country that they had, and they acknowledged that they had an issue, and it was a priority for them to respond to.
Wow.
But that's the type of thing that we're seeing quite often. The other thing too is sometimes people become victims and they don't actually realise it. You know, the siphoning off small amounts of funds through credit cards and statements might not get detected for months or years until someone actually realised, I thought I had some more money in that account. Not everyone's pedantic enough to go through and track and trace every transaction on a financial statement to ensure that they're not missing money or some money is not being siphoned off through the process. So there's a range of different challenges, a range of different issues that help, that mitigate and reduce the amount of reporting. And I might say just before in relation to reporting too, and this comes into prioritisation and risk for countries, is that there is other outcomes that occur around cybercrime that aren't attributed to cybercrime. And when you think, you know, we know of cases, you know, we've got the German case where there was a ransomware attack on a hospital that as a result, a victim passed away as a result of the lack of service through the hospital. And the German police now are looking at murder charges for the cyber criminals that attacked that hospital. But we also are aware that when people have lost their livelihood through some sort of transaction, there's additional pressures that may lead to activities such as suicide that generally aren't attributed to the crimes that they've been the victims of. So, you know, I think the harm issues around cybercrime are a lot more significant than we're aware of because we're not possibly reporting as well as we could around this phenomenon.
That's a very sobering thought, and we definitely need to be doing a lot more reflecting as an industry. So we've talked about a few gaps so far when it comes to trust and awareness, to reporting prioritization. The lack of maturity of the jurisdiction laws as well would be another part to play. Do you have any stories of how this can be improved based on your observations or your experience?
Look, we have, you know, we have over 200 countries globally that set their own laws, set their own policies and resource the government capabilities that obviously provide responses to a government response to some of the threats that we're seeing around cybercrime. And each country has their own thoughts and ideas about what's right, what's wrong, based on a range of different mechanisms and issues, and that's fine. I think the challenge for a global crime type such as this is the lack of consistency. And that lack of consistency also provides inadvertently protections for organised criminals. You'll have countries that are strong on certain elements in relation to cybercrime, and the neighbouring country won't have any laws whatsoever. So it doesn't stop a person actually stepping across a border and being provided, I guess, an element of protection or being untouchable and continuing to exploit the same criminal activities to victims on the other side of the world. I mean, these are challenges that are really quite difficult. And I think slowly over time, these gaps will start to minimise and mitigate. But also in relation to powers and authorities that various governments provide to their agencies to be able to police, respond or prosecute, imprison these types of activities. You know, we've had a case where we had a target that we identified. We got in touch with one of the primary countries that was a victim of that target, and they were reluctant to bring them back into that jurisdiction for a prosecution because the chance of them getting any jail time, actually going to prison for their crimes, was next to zero. And it's interesting, the countries that we identified this target in it was most likely they would get mandatory jail time for the crimes that they committed. So it's quite ironic that one country will look at the theft of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars as being a criminal offence, whilst another country may not impose an imprisonment type of penalty in relation to those activities. And I guess that extends further too in relation to issues around death penalty and the like. For us, that does play into our discussions and our strategies around where a person may be prosecuted, because one of the fundamental things that we're focused on is obviously the human rights of all individuals, both criminal and victim, around this crime type.
Thank you for sharing all of that, Doug. Really, really insightful. Honestly, you're in such a unique position. You're able to witness different attacks, different challenges of our industry, and hopefully bring all of that together. And with Interpol's mission as well, to be able to make a difference and have a meaningful impact. So what is a parting advice that you can give to us as an industry on how we can do better and support Interpol's mission, not just across countries, but across partnerships and different sectors?
I think the importance is, I guess, that we're all in this together, and we need to work out mechanisms to be able to share information quickly and expediently to hopefully disrupt threats as they emerge, to protect all our industry partners from these types of attacks, but also look at how we can actually disrupt the threat actors, whether it's through the infrastructure they use, obviously their livelihood and the financial gains that they generally extrapolate out of these types of criminal activities. So I think that's ultimately where we need to be. How we get there, I think we need to radically change in relation to our activities. I think the challenge for a global community with a global crime type is we need to radically change possibly how we may do this. And I'm not sure that I know the answer to this. I've thought long and hard in relation to some of the possibilities. I think industry need to sort of start to report more, that the countries that they're primarily based in need to understand the risks, threats and issues that they're facing. I think that's one aspect of it. But also, once we get into countries, I think the current laws that exist across the world are quite strong in some parts and quite weak, as I mentioned earlier, in others. And what we need to do is try to get some sort of global consistency in relation to these standards. Europe's actually getting quite a few mechanisms and methods in place for the sharing of information and data in a timely manner in relation to activities like the Budapest Convention, for example. What we need, I guess, is possibly a broader remit that encompasses each of the countries globally, whether that can fall under an arm of the United Nations, a cyber crimes court of some nature. I'm not quite sure, but we need to start to have a conversation about this into the future, because our problem's only going to get worse. Currently it's forecast at $6 trillion a year, cybercrime's costing our communities globally. That's expected to extend out to $10.5 trillion in 2025, as well as 75 billion IoT devices connected to the virtual environment. That presents so many more threats and opportunities and vulnerabilities for people. And for organisations and industries, it's seen some radical change through COVID-19. You've got a workforce that's moved into a home environment. Your threat environment or your protection environments is not necessarily the boundaries of your company's footprint anymore. It extends to the homes of all your staff that are working remotely. And then it also extends to their family, because we've seen the humorous video of a lawyer that had his name, had his facial things changed on his computer by his daughter, and he didn't know how to change it back.
Yes.
But the reality of that is, your kids are going to be potentially using or have access to systems that are connected for an industry, and it presents vulnerabilities for that organisation. And for security managers of organisations, they need to think a lot more laterally about the threats that they've been presented, particularly around this COVID environment. And I think COVID is actually going to change the way we work moving forward. It's been substantiated that we can work on a remote environment. I think a lot of organisations were toying with that concept. So the cost of bricks and mortar for housing staff might not be a significant cost for businesses into the future if they can rely on a remote workforce. But that brings other vulnerabilities and risks to organisations that they need to consider in relation to that vulnerability and how they might be able to protect, I mean, their livelihoods and their assets and their reputation as organisations.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Doug. Thank you for your time.